And Shalom Akim. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rakab Kodash. Double honors to the elder apostles of Great Millstone who teach and rule well, and Shalom to the sincere Akim, spreading the truth in sincerity. Shalom. So in this video, I want to go into how nationality or race is actually established. And the reason I want to do that is because I've been talking to this individual, and this individual told me that she is like 1/16th Indonesian, which is Japhetic, 1/16th. And she explained me that even though she might not look like a person from Indonesia or Japhetic, she basically picked up on the cooking and things like that, and I told her, like, I'm basically rolling on the floor laughing, man. Like, this basically makes me burst out in laughter, you know and I said, like, 1/16th. Then I asked, like, okay, so what about who is who? The reaction that I received was that her grandfather on her mother's side is Japhetic, and that her own mother, does look like, has a little bit, darker skin tone and has dark hair, but truth be told, she is what her father is, that's what the scripture says. And, according to the father's seed line or lineage, that is in actuality how someone's race is established or determined. So if her father's bloodline goes back to Esau, Edom, goes back to Jacob, goes back to Ishmael, Moab, or, perhaps still Japhet, through some other way, she is what her father was, which goes all the way back, all the way back in time, to the time when the basically the progenitors of those nations were established. You see, and for a lot of people that is actually hard to understand and hard to believe and hard to get, because we are so raised in a society where the place where you have been raised determines whether you are of that place, which truth be told, if you stick out like a sore thumb in those places, people even question, like, huh, really? If you have a Jake in Russia, he, let's say he comes to Holland and he only speaks English, but he speaks English very well. You ask him where he's from and he says Russia, you're gonna be like, huh? What you mean Russia? Where and basically, where do you originate from? Then he mentions some country, in West Africa or something. Then he'd be like, oh, now I understand. Okay. Same thing. You even have, so-called white people over there in Jamaica, right? You have so-called white people there over there in Jamaica who speak with that Jamaican accent, which makes it very hard for you to determine, like, without any visual without any visual proof of that person being there, but only hearing his voice, if that individual speaks, it's very hard for you to determine, what his nationality might be. But the moment you open your eyes, you see a so-called white man. You're gonna be like, you from Jamaica? You're from Jamaica, man. You from Jamaica? You're gonna be like, man, that's not true. And then he says, yeah, man, I'm from Kingston. No, all jokes aside, but that's what you get. And truth be told, where you have been raised does not really determine your nationality, right? Of course, we do know and understand that right now, majority of people from a certain nationality might reside in a certain place, you know, but that is actually not what determines their race or nationality, you know. So this is Numbers chapter 1 and 18. It says, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first day of the second month. And they declared their pedigrees after their families by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names from 20 years old and upward by their polls. So how race or nationality is actually determined is by understanding, where your father's seed line, goes back to, and in this day and age, that is quite hard to, actually, say, but by testing the spirit, man. But by testing the spirit, that's the only thing that we're able to do, and last week when I went to school, there a woman from the Antillean Islands, and she told me like that her father is a so-called white man, but her mother is like dark skin, is a Jake. But then when I see her whole behavior, I'd be like, hell no. Even though she was raised among those people, there is no chance of her being an Edomite, man. The way that she moves, behaves, speaks, hell no. Then she got to talking, about one of her sons, right? And she has multiple baby daddies or something about that, which I don't know the details about. But she said one of her sons, is like very clumsy and doesn't really have any skills. We're not really able to ride a bicycle and things like that. And then as a joke, I said, "Are you like what's the nationality of the father?" She said, "Yeah, Antillean." I said, "You sure he's Antillean? You sure he's Antillean?" She's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." I said, "Are you sure he's not Makamba?" Then she said, like, "Yeah, well, which Makamba is like a white person. That's Antillean way of saying basically a white person, a cracker, you know." And then she made a joke herself, like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, it might be, man. He might have inherited those genes from, her father or something." But that shows you that, you know, that woman, even though she says that she has a Dutch father, doesn't have to mean that he's actually a so-called white man. He could be just like me, an Israelite, going back to Jacob, you know, making both her parents actually Jakes, but looking different in the physical sense. Because the spirit that she carries, I see like, man, no, man, she's like a, she's like a Jake, you know. Um, so like I said, Let me see. Because I want to have the account. I want to have the account where Apostle Paul says that he has a Roman citizenship. But where is that? Salakia. Let me see. Because Apostle Paul himself, he is actually a a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin. Grew up in Tarsus. What is now Salakia, Cilicia. But let me grab those scriptures, man. This is Acts chapter 16, verse 37. But Paul said unto them, they have beaten us openly and condemned, being Romans, and have cast us into prison, and now do they thrust us out privily? Nay, verily, but let them come themselves and fetch us out. So Apostle Paul, he has Roman citizenship. He has Roman citizenship, man, and through that, he had to be treated differently, by those from Rome. So this is Acts 22 and 25. And as they bound him with tongues, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. So, like I said, Apostle Paul has that Roman citizenship. Romans 11. So this is Romans 11 and 1. I say then, hath the Most High cast away his people? The Most High forbid, for I also am an Israelite. So Apostle Paul says, in the scriptures in general, he says he's a Roman. He has Roman citizenship. But he's also an Israelite, a descendant of Jacob. It says, of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin. So pertaining, to his true nationality, the race that he belongs towards, he is an Israelite, of the tribe of Benjamin, because the nation of Israel has 12 tribes. 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. But where he lived or where he grew up, or, in the case of, him having that Roman citizenship, he is also a Roman, which will be similar to us, living in Holland, having the Dutch citizenship or the German citizenship or the the Belgique citizenship, or, like other brothers, Italian citizenship, So it is not about where where you come from right now in this day and age. It is where your lineage goes back towards. Let's say Conor McGregor. He's Irish by citizenship. He was born in Ireland. But when we go back in his ancestry, he goes back to the nation of Israel, because we see, according to his spirit, he's an Israelite. Same thing with Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, and a couple of other, Asian martial artists and actors, that just have too much flavor in their spirit, to be just plain heathens, you know. Um, Let me see. Let me see. What is this? This is not what I was looking for. This is Acts 21 and 39. But Paul said, I am a man which am a Jew of Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city, and I beseech thee, suffer me to speak unto the people. So let me see where Cilicia is. So that's in Asia Minor, So you see that Apostle Paul, he holds many, forms of citizenships, but his lineage does go back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, making him an Israelite, So the point of this whole video is to actually show you and bring forth that, the seed line determines the nationality. And for a lot of people, in this day and age, that can still be quite hard to trace back, because Esau has also doctored with certain things, information, history has been altered, and we in these latter days, the elect of Yahweh Shem Yahushai, we come to the understanding of the truth of what is going on, and we know, for instance, that there has been a 1,000-year period, called the Dark Ages, in which Jake ruled for 1,000 years. Jake took also a lot of women of the heathen that we ruled over, laid down with them, beget children. Years later, those children look like the heathens, man. And now in this day and age, a lot of us, of the Israelites, we don't know what our true heritage is, but in the spirit, feel, different than the actual heathens, man. The same goes both ways, actually, man. There might be heathens out there that look like Jake, also being mentioned as tares. You look like Jake, but you ain't, So, the conversation that I had with this person, sparked, me to make this video, because the people of this world, they're still blinded by the things that that they have been told or grown up with, which is incorrect. It doesn't matter where you're born. It doesn't matter what mixture your parents were. What determines your race and nationality is where your father's lineage goes back towards. No matter what your father or forefathers look like, Yes, the mother side has an effect on the outcome of what it looks like in the physical sense, but in the end, what matters the most, or what actually only matters, is where the father's seed line goes back towards. You see. So yeah, throughout the scriptures there are multiple examples. For instance, in the lineage of Yahweh Shai, we have Rehoboam, which Rehoboam, his mother was an Ammonitess, man. His mother was an Ammonitess, so that's Japanese, man. That's Japan. Japanese influences, man. But when you go into the scriptures, we're only allowed to set up those that belong to our own nation as kings. So even though the mother was an Ammonitess, had an influence on, what Rehoboam looked like, didn't matter because the father determines what's going to happen with the seed line, you see? So yeah, with that, I do hope and pray that this video was edifying. And with that, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rakakadash. Double honors to the elder apostles of Great Millstone, who teach and rule well, and shalom to the sincere Akim, spread this truth in sincerity. Shalom.